All right, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt there holding the daily briefing, taking a variety of questions from the correspondents in the room. Senior national policy reporter Ann Flaherty was listening in as well when asking about an end game to this war. Sort of a confusing answer. She said, we know that the U.S. military and our brave warfighters are quickly and expeditiously executing these objectives well ahead of schedule. So my first question is, Ann, we still don't know what the schedule is. They haven't really told us an exact schedule. But ultimately, the operations will end when the commander-in-chief determines the military objectives have been met. Okay, we still are not quite clear on all the objectives. Fully realize that Iran is in a position of complete and unconditional surrender, whether they say it or not. Okay, unconditional surrender is we surrender. So can you parse through this and tell us what you make of her answer?
Yeah, Kira, I think that you're hitting on all of those important points. I mean, so backing up, President Trump had said initially he thinks that the war could last 4 to 5 weeks. So when we hear Caroline Leavitt say, you know, we're ahead of schedule, that's what I take that to mean. One of the more interesting, I think, telling answers came when a reporter asked, you know, President Trump has said, you know, I'm not going to be satisfied with the next leader of Iran. I should get to decide who it is. He's not happy with the current Ayatollah. So, you know, I should have a say in that. But of course, she just said, you know, simply, he asked her, does that mean the war will be over when President Trump is satisfied with that leader? And she said, we'll only be satisfied when Iran no longer poses a risk to the United States. So clearly a subjective standard. We don't have any sort of clear benchmark. You and I both covered the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We remember talking about benchmarks a lot. They have not set very clear benchmarks on how this war will end.
Let's bring in White House correspondent Karen Travers, who was there in the briefing, even got a chance to throw a question there to Caroline Leavitt just about this talk of Steve Witkoff having conversations with Russia, with Vladimir Putin, Putin saying he wants to help out somehow with this war with Iran. What are your thoughts? Did we get anywhere with that? And you even asked the fact, can he be trusted on this?
Yeah, and that was something that the president said yesterday, Kira. He had that phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And after, when the president was talking to reporters yesterday, he said that Putin had told him he wanted to be helpful in the Middle East. But the Kremlin has put out a statement where Putin declared very strong public support for the new leader of Iran and unwavering support for Iran. And I asked Caroline, how does the president think Russia can be helpful if they're not helping Iran? And also whether the president pushed Putin on the issue of Russia providing intelligence to Iran in this war, because U.S. officials tell us they believe that that has been happening. Now, Steve Witkoff earlier today said that that did come up in the phone call yesterday. The Russians assured the president that was not happening, and Witkoff said, we take their word at that. Caroline told me that the president has said that that would be unacceptable. She didn't indicate anything further about whether or not the president said to Putin that that is not acceptable. But on the issue of Russia taking Iran's side in this, notably she didn't answer that part and said that the president's views on this have been clear. Kira.
All right, Karen, thank you. And one more question. We already know a total of 7 lives lost in this conflict. Now we know there are more than 100 injured. Of course, this is of tremendous concern to the American public. We remember Afghanistan, remember Iraq. So with no real end game in sight, and now we're already seeing the loss of life, and we're seeing many of our service members injured. And also a recent Ipsos poll that's out saying most of Americans are very concerned about this becoming an extended war.
Yeah, that's right, Kira. And also don't forget that, you know, there is a question of money. Will the Trump administration have to go to Congress and say, by the way, we'd like you to start paying for this war, which is going to ignite a political debate. As you mentioned, 140 troops have been wounded. Most of them have returned to duty. 32 are wounded enough that they've been sidelined. 8 of those are considered severely wounded. So we're going to try to stay on top of those numbers. They have not been easy to get from the military because they say, of course, that, you know, those numbers can fluctuate as medical cases are evaluated.
All right. Ann Flaherty, Karen Travers, thank you both. Quick break. More news ahead.